Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Southeast Collaborative Online Conference. My name is Dorcas Davis, and I am the Continuing Education and Learning Director for Georgia Public Library Services. And we have Lauren on tech support. She is from North Carolina, and she is the Director for Continuing Education for North Carolina. And I'll be your host for this session today. Today, we will learn ways on how to build a culture of reading and book talking among staff. Susan Maguire worked for a decade in public libraries with experience in reference, reader services, collection management, and circulation before joining Booklist as a senior editor, collection management, and library outreach person. She is also the host of Booklist Shelf Care, the podcast. This event is supported through funding for the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Before we get started, I have a few things to share with you. This session will be recorded and archived. A link will be emailed next week with access to the archived session. If there are other people watching this webinar with you, we'd love to hear about it so that we can have an accurate head count for our records. You will have an opportunity to submit text questions and comments to our presenter. Just type them in the chat box. You will also receive CEU for this session and the other sessions included in the Southeast Collaborative Conference. Lastly, look for the survey link in your inbox. And now I will turn things over to Susan. Hi, Susan, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. As Dorcas mentioned, I worked in libraries for a long time. I was at the Kanawha County Public Library in West Virginia. And most recently, I was in Chapel Hill. So hello to anyone from Chapel Hill who's here. But today, I'm going to talk to you about sports. And by sports, I mean Reader's Advisory. When I was designing this presentation, I was so excited to be able to use all kinds of clever sports metaphors. And you will see as I talk that I came up with zero. So it's going to be about Reader's Advisory, but it is a team sport because there's a lot to know when you're talking to patrons about books. And I think the easiest way to do it is to not do it alone. So isn't that wonderful and powerful? So let me, oh gosh, figure out how to go to the next slide. Are you all ready? Here we go. Okay. Here is what we're going to talk about today. Sorry, I am in Chicago where there's a lot of heat and it's very dry. So I don't have coronavirus. I just have dry atmosphere coughing. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about why we want to do Reader's Advisory this way, why this is the best way to do it. I'm going to go real quick over some of the fundamentals of Reader's Advisory. I'm going to take, it's not a break, it's part of the conversation about Reader's Advisory, because I'm going to specifically call out the importance of diversity and inclusion. And then I'm going to end with rules, because I love rules, because I'm a librarian, and some resources. And as I'm talking, if you have a question, or if you think of a particular resource or exercise that you've used with people that's been really useful, feel free to share it in the chat box and I can see it. And Dorcas is, excuse me, Dorcas is going to be monitoring it so that we can all talk about the great stuff that we do, because, you know, the team sport on this webinar as well. All right. So let's talk about some of the barriers to doing comprehensive, good Reader's Advisory training in your library. As I mentioned, I've been in libraries for a long time. I know how tough things can be for you all. Sometimes you don't have institutional support. Sometimes your administration doesn't want to send people to training. Sometimes they have other priorities and maybe aren't as focused on the importance of doing direct Reader's Advisory training. I mean, we don't need to get into that. sometimes, well, not sometimes, but we all have a finite amount of space and time that we can use in a day because of physics, and also because of money, which is not physics. But you can't always be sending people to conferences. You probably had some trouble scheduling this webinar today, which is an hour and free, because there's only so much time in the world. I've also found that when I'm starting the reader's advisory training process with people, especially with people who um, don't have professional training background, but even with librarians who don't have reader's advisory experience, it can be really overwhelming. I don't know if you guys know this, but there are a lot of books in the world. And when you watch somebody who's really good at reader's advisory, it seems like they have perfect recall of everything they've ever read, and that can be really intimidating. But so a lot of what we are going to talk about is kind of reassuring people that they know more than they think they do. And there's also a barrier of innovation, which I looked up. It's a real word. Sorry to tell you. I'm not sorry. But I think that as librarians, we want to follow the process. We want to do things right. And that can really stop us from making progress. I know that seems counterintuitive, but I do think it's true. If we rely on these sort of old-fashioned ways of doing reader's advisory training, we're not going to be able to get anything done. And, hitting your head against a brick wall is not a great way to get things done. If you take nothing else away from this session, let it be that don't hit your head against a brick wall. So we're going to have a little bit of a different approach. Even if you feel like this little guy up here in the corner, we will talk about ways to get staff up to speed without banging our head against that proverbial wall, by building a culture of reading in our libraries. So instead of thinking of training as the classes or the workshops or webinars themselves, I want you to think of the training as the outcome. What do you want from this process? You want everyone on your staff who talks to patrons to be able to talk to patrons about books. So everyone who comes in the library whoever they talk to on your staff, they can get a suggestion from, or they can at least have a conversation with them. And the way you do that is you're going to build a culture of reading, and you're going to be the leader of that culture. So get ready. The easiest way to do that, but our way to do that, is to model good reader's advisory behavior. So talk to staff members about what you're reading, ask them what they're reading, and use your training to show people what good reader's advisory looks like. I also support having a secret agenda, which is another way of saying that you're going to be intentional about the work you do and about the work you encourage your staff to do, always with that goal of building a strong reading culture among your staff. I'm still coming up with the name that I really like for it, but in Chapel Hill, I used to call this No Big Deal RA, or NBDRA, which, it needs some work. So actually, if you have good names for it, feel free to share them in the chat. But basically what that means is you're integrating reader's advisory training into the things you're already doing, being intentional about these tasks that you do in the library to give them that reader's advisory edge that ends up helping patrons. And the reason that we do this is, I don't know how often you've done a 1-hour training on anything in the library, and then you don't have time to go back and revisit in 6 months or whatever. So the training doesn't really stick. Because there's so much to absorb in reader's advisory, you have to do the skills and the fundamentals of it, plus the sheer volume of books. Sorry, I just lost my place thinking about the sheer volume of books. It's sort of a thing that you have to do constantly to help staff build their knowledge. So we're going to break the training up into a constant flow of bite-sized, manageable pieces that makes it easier for staff to absorb. It makes it easier for you to lead the staff-wide RA program that people can stick with. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm selling a dieting app, but I don't think you need to go on a diet. You all are perfect. But you should feel compelled to build Reader's Advisory into what you're already doing. So let's do that. And I want to take a minute to reiterate why Reader's Advisory is so important for everybody. And I'm going to tell you a real quick story that I think probably a lot of you might be able to relate to. When I was in Kanawha County, when you walked into the library, the first thing you saw was the circulation desk. And most of our patrons, those were the only staff that they interacted with. Returning books, checking out books, picking up holds, all that stuff happened at the circ desk. And our trained readers advisors, who were wonderful, but they were back, I don't have a good concept of space, 200 or 300 feet back, the reference desk. And there was something about that 1 minute walk, 30-second walk, that was really a barrier for patrons. It just sort of ignited this, politeness. I don't want to bother this person with my question, when all of us in reference were sitting back there saying, we want you to bother us, we want you to ask these questions. So again, rather than banging our head against the wall, we talked more about meeting patrons where they are so we can serve their needs. And by the same token, you want to meet staff where they are. So again, doing these sort of small bite-sized pieces of training that they can easily absorb, that they can work into their regular workflow so that they can meet patron needs. But before we get into that, I want to do a real quick review of the foundations of Reader's Advisory. And I could spend 2 or 3 hours talking about this, but I'm not going to, because NC Live has a subscription to Novelist, and I'm sure some of you folks who are from other parts of the South also have access to Novelist. So I'm going to go ahead and recommend that you use that. I'm sure, I hope anyway, that you've all used Novelist to do read-alikes, to find great lists for displays, to help find patrons their next read. But they also have a lot of really excellent training resources. So at the bottom of the screen, this is what the top of every Novelist screen looks like. So when you click on, especially for Reader's Advisory, you get a ton of great training resources. So they have introductory training, they have keeping up with genre resources, they have things for training staff. It's really, really wonderful. So I'm going to breeze through, but if you want a refresher, or if you feel like you need more of a deep dive, I'm going to recommend Novelist for that. So here we go. The appeal elements are the cornerstone of all of our Reader's Advisory. This is how we break down what a reader enjoyed about the reading experience, and can then kind of find clues to what they're looking for next. And there are 5 of them that we have, I guess that Reader's Advisors have identified. And these are the ones that Novelist uses. Sometimes you'll see them expressed in slightly different ways. I'm going with Novelist because I think they're great, and also because I think that's going back to Novelist for further training is a good idea. So character refers to the kind of characters they're reading about in the story. Are they an unreliable narrator? Do you want really clear good guys and bad guys? Do you want people who have no context for human emotions because they're from a different planet? That kind of thing. The storyline is also sometimes called the blueprint, and this encompasses a lot of different stuff. It encompasses the plot of the book, so what happens. It also, if you're reading a genre book, all of the kind of genre trappings will be included in the storyline. So for a mystery, if you're talking, you'll always have a crime and then the crime is solved. But if you're talking about a cozy mystery, or if you're talking about a gritty Swedish, Nordic, everyone's cold and blue and dead, all right, kind of thriller, that would also go into the blueprint. The pace is, how fast were you flipping the pages? And sometimes people want fast, sometimes people don't. The tone, I like to describe that as how the book made you feel. Did you laugh? Did you cry? Were you totally creeped out by it? And then the writing style, this can be the hardest to identify if you haven't read the book, but novelist does a good job identifying it. And it can be something that you can help readers talk about. So, was the narrator very snarky? Was it a first person narrator? That's something some people really hate. Was the style kind of experimental or more straightforward? Were the descriptions really lush and detailed, or did you get tons of inner monologue, or were there a lot of dialogue? These are the things that go into the writing style. And then you also, the second half, once you know what someone liked about the book, we're going to talk about it. So the first goal, like I said, is to find out what they liked about the book. And it's important that you think of this as a conversation. So there's a lot of back and forth. I don't know how many times you all have asked somebody, what did you like about the book? And they say, it was good, which is great. We want people to feel good about what they read, but that's not particularly helpful for you as a reader's advisor. So, you can ask them questions about, did you feel like you were up all night trying to find out what happened at the end? Did you laugh at the book? And then the second part of that conversation is, do you want something else like that? Or, if you were having a laugh riot with this book, do you want something more serious next time? And then the final stage of that, and it's not really a final stage, but is the book talk, where you share with the patrons some suggestions, identifying some of the appeal elements that you talked about in your conversation. And then the whole cycle sort of repeats, because just because you get one suggestion, you might not hit it out of the park. Or if you do, wait, I used a sports metaphor. Oh my God, I'm so proud. Okay. Or if you do hit it out of the park, hopefully they'll come back and want to talk to you some more about books. So that's the fastest RA 101 you'll ever get. This is a big slide. I want to talk for a minute about equity, diversity, and inclusion in our collections and in Reader's Advisory. So this first quote is from the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights. And it talks about maintaining diverse collections and how important that is and how fundamental that is to library service. So I also want to think about how we can kind of take a step beyond that from the collection to connecting patrons to the collection. And the second part of the slide will kind of get us there. And I know you all didn't have, there wasn't a video of me in the beginning, so I'm just going to come out and tell you that I am a white woman, and librarianship is primarily made of white women. And one thing that I've seen the reason I say this is because I want to be real frank, and I've mostly seen this from fellow white women. But I'm sure we can find exceptions to that. But the point of this is, I've seen some pushback sometimes to this idea of reading diversely and sort of intentionally making sure that we have not just a wide range of perspectives, but we have a wide range of racial, cultural, economic, ability experiences in our collection and that we're sharing with readers. The reaction I've seen is sometimes that folks don't want diversity shoved down their throats. They want to read something familiar, or something like even someone saying, well, I just like quote unquote good books, which is, I think, probably the most insidious of all. I think it's worth examining why we think that way, or even if you don't want to examine it too much, if that is a reaction that you have, I want you to step back and I want you to think about what you like to read and why you like to read it. Do you like to read because you like to escape? Do you like to expand your horizons? Is it to feel comforted? Is it to make you think? Is it all of those things? Is it sometimes one of those things, sometimes nothing else? And I think giving patrons access to diverse suggestions is really the best way that we can do. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. Is the most important way that we can make sure they're getting the full reader's advisory experience. Um, reading a book outside of your ethnicity or gender identity um, is one part of the reading experience, but then there are also those appeal elements that we talked about. So I'm getting ahead of myself because there's something that educators and youth literacy folks talk a lot about, which is this concept of mirrors and windows. So a mirror is when you see your culture and identity reflected back at you in literature. And then a window is when you're reading something that is from a culture or identity that you don't live. And this is why we talk about own voices books being important. For white people, we get a lot of mirrors. I mean, think about Harry Potter, for example. I don't know, Harry Potter is always the example that I come up with. We have tons and tons of mirrors in our reading experience, but we should also, as white readers, and we're helping white patrons, we should also think about windows and why those are important, why own voices books are important. And own voices refers to books about a marginalized culture or identity written by a member of that group. So when they're writing from that personal space, it gives the work some authenticity. It makes the mirror an accurate reflection, and to sort of belabor the metaphor, it makes the window clear. And this is true for patrons of all ethnicities, of all races. But I just wanted to give a special call out to white people serving white patrons because I'm a white person and I think we sometimes miss that part of the conversation. Okay, it looks like someone just asked me to repeat the mirrors and windows definition again. So it's a metaphor for describing what you're experiencing in media. So a mirror is when you read a book that reflects your own culture. So if you are a Muslim person living in, well, if you're a Muslim person, you're reading a book about Muslim culture, so that kind of reflects your culture. And a window would be if you're a non-Muslim person reading a book about Muslim culture, that for a Muslim reader would be a mirror. For a non-Muslim reader, it's a window. I'm not sure if that made it clearer. I hope it did, but I can go back and repeat that or phrase it differently if you need me to. Okay, so the idea of equity, diversity, inclusion doesn't just apply to the books we present, but also to the folks we have presenting these books. Think about your circulation staff. They are probably the largest department in your library. They probably reflect the racial and economic diversity of your community the best. So it's vital that you are building a strong readers advisory team with the most diverse perspectives that you can from the library. And building a team that is steeped in this reading culture is crucial. The more people you have, and not just for diversity reasons, although that is a strong reason, but it's also because the more people you have keeping up with the world of books and reading, the more knowledge you have to share with your patrons. And keeping up doesn't just mean what's new, it also means people who are familiar with the backlist, the stuff that's already in the collection that doesn't have 16,000 million holds on it. And the beauty of building that culture of reading is that staff can start anywhere. And that was one of my favorite things about being a manager, among many things that I did not love, but the thing that I loved the most was getting to know the people in my department, seeing what they were interested in and seeing how we could apply their interests to library work. And that will almost always work in a reader's advisory space. You probably have someone on staff who reads a ton of dragon books or space battle books. So let that person start their reader's advisory experience, have them build up a deep knowledge of the Dragon and Space Battle collection, part of your collection, and have them start there looking at what they like to read, not just the Dragon and Space Battle part of it, but identifying the appeal elements that stand out to them, exploring the collection with those appeal elements in mind. And I talked in the beginning about that intimidation factor, that folks think that they are not qualified to talk about books. But what I always told folks in the circulation department was, you actually are probably the most qualified to talk about the books that we have in the collection. Everything that gets checked out and returned comes through you. The books that all get shelved by you. And you are the department that talks the most to the patrons. And so when I talked about being intentional about your work, and again, the sort of secret agenda is, when you're doing the checkout and returns and you're doing the shelving, don't let it be sort of a mindless task, but pay attention to what's coming in and out. You know, is everybody suddenly checking out Agatha Christie books? Maybe it's time to do a display on the Golden Age of Mystery or something like that. That was actually one specific thing that happened in Chapel Hill, so that example always stands out to me. But there are things besides paying attention that a well-trained staff needs to make this strong culture of reading happen in your library. They need to know, and this is everybody, they need to know what's on the shelves or the backlist. They need to know what's coming next, and what's in the news, and they need to know how to talk about it. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. Like all good librarians, I have rules, and I'm going to go into each of these rules a little more specifically, but this is just so you're ready for what to expect with the rules. The most important rule, the most foundational rule of Reader's Advisory is to not judge. Dr. Betty Rosenberg, sort of her big thing about this is never apologize for your reading tastes. And the corollary of that is, don't ask your coworkers and don't ask your patrons to apologize for theirs. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had this experience of patron, you know, especially with romance readers, where they come in and they're kind of embarrassed about what they like to read. It's important that you're open to what they are interested in, and that you're able to make suggestions that they will be interested in. I remember having this conversation with a coworker in Kanawha County who said that she wasn't really a big reader. She was on the circ staff, and I was trying to kind of get everyone ready and get everyone psyched to be the most amazing readers advising circulation staff in the state of West Virginia. And, you know, she was like, but I don't read at all. And I said, well, I know that's not true because I've seen you reading. And her response was that, this was several years ago, and her response was that she only read these trashy Tori Spelling memoirs, so that didn't really count as reading. And I said, no, that absolutely counts as reading. And in fact, that is very exciting reading because there are tons of patrons who are interested in that kind of book. I mean, Tori Spelling is maybe a dated reference, but think about how many holds you all have on the Jessica Simpson memoir right now. Whatever folks are interested in, you want to empower them to talk about it, and you want to make sure that patrons are comfortable coming to you for it. The idea of mirrors and windows, again, it's so important to me that I use the slide twice. You can use those appeal elements that we talked about before to find books that will mirror or offer windows into people's cultures based on those appeal elements. So if you have somebody who's really into romantic comedies, in 2019 there was sort of this, I don't, trend isn't really the right word, but kind of multicultural adaptations of Jane Austen novels. So Sonali Dev had, I think it was called Pride and Prejudice and Other Flavors, that was about Indian American folks in, I want to say California. California is the least important part of that book. There was Aisha at Last, which was set in Canada, but it was about a Muslim community, and it hit like all the beats of Pride and Prejudice. And it was very funny, it was very cute and very fun. And so those are just a couple of examples of kind of how mirrors and windows work in a reader's advisory setting. And here's the biggest one, which is always be reading. I mean, several things by that. I mean, always be reading a book, so that, you know, that's the easiest way to know about books, is to read them. But you also want to always be reading about books. And part of that is the intentional and mindful circulation tasks, but there are also specific things that you can do. So here are ways that you can keep up with what's coming and keep up with trends in publishing and things like that. And a lot of these resources are from Booklist, and I am from Booklist. I promise this is not going to be half an hour of a Booklist commercial, but I am going to share some Booklist suggestions. So professional reading journals that have reviews like Booklist, like Library Journal, that are geared toward librarians are super useful, because they, in their reviews, they address those appeal elements. So, you know, this is a mystery, but it could have crossover appeal for people who like romantic comedies because it has that kind of tone. You'll find that kind of thing in the reviews there. Shelf Awareness is a blog that is all about publishing. I'm going to be honest, I find Shelf Awareness a little overwhelming because a lot happens in publishing all the time. They have several newsletters that you can sign up for that you get the information in smaller pieces that are a little easier to digest. That's kind of a theme with me. Library Reads, I don't know if you all are familiar with Library Reads. If not, I will tell you. Library Reads is a program where public librarians from all around the country, and public library workers, I should say, vote on upcoming books. And they use a site called Edelweiss or NetGalley to vote. And then Library Reads every month will publish the top 10 books in the forthcoming month that librarians are most excited about. And that's a really great way for you to find some books that librarians around the country think will be popular with your patrons. And Twitter, I know like Twitter is sometimes a nightmare, but there are a couple of hashtags that I think are useful for keeping up with publishing and with book trends. One is this WOC in romance. That's obviously specific to romance. It stands for Women of Color in Romance, or maybe Writers of Color in Romance. I'm having a panic and I don't know. But every Tuesday, folks who are non-white authors kind of announce the romance books that they have coming out. And that's a really great way, if you are serving romance readers, to be able to offer some great mirror and window suggestions that meet their romance reading needs. And then the other one is EWGC, stands for Early Word Galley Chat. And this is similar to Library Reads. This is where librarians who have read early copies of books basically get on Twitter and talk about how excited they are about these books. And they mention specific titles. And this is something that happens the first Tuesday of every month at a specific time of day that I forget. But if you just do a search on Twitter for this hashtag, you will see some great suggestions. And I also think there are some great examples of good appeal-focused book talking. So I wanted to share one or two with you that just came out yesterday, because yesterday was the first Tuesday of March. I can't believe it's March. Vicky Nesting tweeted this: in case any of you have not read it yet, Valentine by Elizabeth Wetmore is a gorgeous and nuanced debut with evocative descriptions of the West Texas setting and characters with voices so distinct you will feel as if you know them intimately. I think that's a pretty solid book talk. You know where the book's setting, you know where the book is set, you know what the characters are like, and and that gives you a lot of information on who might like to read it. And then another one from someone named the Dandelion Brooks. Love a Twitter name. It's about Network Effect by Martha Wells. Network Effect, in 2 words, Murderbot returns. An old friend shows up in this novel-length adventure, but then there's kidnapping, alien pirates, social anxiety, violence, rescue, and action that keeps me turning pages till the end. So you get some sense of the tone of that book, and you get definitely a sense of the pace of that book, and some of the blueprint of the book. Alien pirates, probably not set in our world, although who knows. So that's a fun thing to keep up with. I also think it's important to know what your patrons are seeing. Oprah's O Magazine and Entertainment Weekly are 2 popular magazines that I think cover books really well. You know, it's not the main focus of what they cover, but they do have, they're good examples of popular media with book coverage that's worth keeping up with. I mean, the New York Times, the New Yorker, there are tons of other public resources that are excellent, have excellent book coverage. These I like because it's digestible, it's small, it tends to be more focused on popular books, so fiction and memoirs that are going to have wide appeal. And I think if you have it in your budget to get a second subscription to both of those and just have them in the staff room so that folks can flip through on their lunch break, or that's a really useful resource to have, because then people will start recognizing names, they'll start recognizing book covers that they've seen covered elsewhere. And that will help them in talking to patrons about books. Another one is Book Riot, which is geared toward the public, and they talk a lot about, they have great book lists. It's a great place to find display ideas. But I want to specifically call out, they have a newsletter for librarians called Check Your Shelf. And the woman who runs it is named Katie McLean Horner. She just got married. I think that's her additional last name. But what she does that I like so much is she will talk about publishing news. You know, when the American Dirt scandal was happening, she linked to a lot of resources about that. She'll talk about book and movie adaptations that are coming up. And she has a section that specifically says what your patrons are hearing about, which is exactly what we want from these resources. So when you have an author who's going to be in Entertainment Weekly, who's going to be on the Today Show, she'll mention that that's a book that you should probably have on your radar. So those 2 are really useful. And I have a handout that I created that has all of these resources listed, and it has links to the newsletters and to some of these websites. So I should have told you that before I started talking about them, so you didn't have to break your hand taking notes. But anyway, that will be, if it's not available now, it will be available at the end of the session. Awards and best of lists are always a really easy way. I'm just going to go ahead and show you all of them. A really easy way to find books that, like I said, will have pretty wide appeal. You know, you have the genre awards. Hugo and Nebula are science fiction and fantasy. The Stoker Awards are for horror. The Edgars and the Anthonys are the big mystery awards. The Rita Award is the big romance award, but they're actually not doing that this year for a variety of reasons. But the Ripped Bodice is a bookstore in Los Angeles that specializes in romance fiction. And they've been around for a couple of years, but this year was the first year they created their own awards. So if you rely on the Rita Awards for your selections, or for your kind of getting the romance books that you know you're going to talk to people about, the Ripped Bodice Awards are a good alternative. Also, it's fun to just walk around saying Ripped Bodice like a weirdo. Maybe that's just me. Anyway. And I want to shout out some of the awards that the ALA presents, some of the lists that they present. The notable books it includes fiction and nonfiction. The Over the Rainbow list is by the Rainbow Roundtable, which used to be called the GLBT Roundtable. They do the acronym a little differently than I'm used to hearing it, but now it's called the Rainbow Roundtable. So all of those books, it's fiction and nonfiction that covers queer subject matters and features queer characters and is by queer authors. And those are for adults. They also have a version for younger readers, but I don't know what that is off the top of my head, sorry. And the reading list is kind of their genre, the best of the genre lists. And the thing that I really like about the reading list is that you get the best adrenaline book, the best historical fiction book, the best relationship book. But then they also give you a couple of read-alikes for the winner. And then they give you the runners-up that were hot that year. So you get, 4 or 5 new titles and then 3 or 4 backlist titles that you can use for your readers' advisory efforts. And yes, the reading list is from ALA. I think there's a link to it. I linked to it on the handout, but if you search, I think the best way to search is RUSA reading list, which is RUSA, stands for Reference and User Services Association, which is part of ALA. The Listen List is an audiobook list, which is equally wonderful. And the Carnegie Award for Excellence in Fiction and Nonfiction, there's one winner, but they have a long list, and so you'll get 50 books that will have wide appeal. It tends to be more literary in tone, but we've all got literary fiction readers, and these are it's a great place to find good suggestions. So, and as we're going through these, oh, surprise, here's the next slide. As we're going through these, if you have any favorite awards or favorite websites that you use, add them in the chat and we'll talk about them. All right, the next rule, in case you couldn't tell, is I need you to practice. It is so important. I made the font really big. And here are some resources that can help you to practice. The reason you have to practice, I mean, just because like in anything, you have to practice, but especially if you're dealing with folks who are intimidated or don't feel like they have a lot of time to devote to being perfect at Reader's Advisory before they do it, the more they do it, the more comfortable they'll be and the better at it they'll get. So, Goodreads has yearly best of lists. Goodreads is a good one. It's usually quite different from what other best of lists are, but the reason I think it's a good one is because it's from readers, and there's also sometimes with the genre awards you get smaller publishers or self-published books get nominated there, which is really exciting. We don't always see things like that in our normal library reading. So yes, Goodreads awards, hooray. Okay. I don't know if any of y'all are podcast listeners, but here are a couple of my favorite podcasts to listen to help you practice Reader's Advisory. The New York Public Library, they talk to authors, they talk to staff members. I mean, the New York Public Library, as I'm sure you can imagine, is pretty big. So, and they just have really wide-ranging book conversations. So that's a lot of fun. The ELA Area Public Library has something called the 3 Books Podcast, where, can you guess how many books they talk about? It is 3. And it's a really fun idea that, you're sort of limited in what you're going to hear about, but you get all the information you need there. And What Should I Read Next with Anne Bogle? This is actually, she's not a librarian. She is, I think she's like a lifestyle blogger, but she reads a lot. She talks about books a lot. And what I really like about it for Reader's Advisory practice is that she'll have a guest on and she'll ask the guest for a couple of books they love and a book that they hated. And by the end, they'll kind of dive into what they like about a book. And at the end, she'll give them, I think she gives them 3 suggestions, and she explains why, based on their conversation, why she gave them those suggestions. You know, you talked about really liking characters with an offbeat sense of humor, and this narrator has an offbeat sense of humor. Yes, and someone pointed out Anne Bogle, her blog is called The Modern Mrs. Darcy. So there you go, you got a Pride and Prejudice connection. We have another podcast suggestion, Overdrive's Professional Book Nerds. I've listened to that one. That's a lot of fun. And I think that's pretty short too, which is what I like. Currently Reading Pod and No Thanks, We're Booked. I love these podcast suggestions. And there are tons of great library podcasts. I just mentioned a couple because, you know, we only got so much time. Oh, here's another suggestion for booktubers. So if you all spend some time on YouTube, yeah, there's a huge culture of booktubers. And Sarah Metz is recommending Paperback Dreams. Oh, they take suggestions from viewers. Ooh, that's fun. Okay. Another Twitter hashtag for practice is Ask a Librarian, which I think they do it on Thursday afternoons, and people just write into Twitter with the hashtag Ask a Librarian, asking for book suggestions. And novelists, the folks at Novelist answer this a lot of the time, and they give really thoughtful answers. So that's a good place to see a good model of Twitter Readers Advisory. But folks will say, you know, I've been reading a lot of biology textbooks and I want to get back into science fiction. What do you recommend? And, you know, so they're similar to questions you might get on the reference or circulation desk. So that's fun. And then in real life, how do you practice in real life? I really encourage low stakes interactions with other staff. Practice on each other. And my favorite place to practice Reader's Advisory is the new bookshelf, because people are usually there browsing. They usually don't know exactly what they want. They're waiting for something to jump out at them. And so they're open to having a conversation. So even if it's not the most perfect formal Reader's Advisory conversation you ever came up with, because you have someone who's ready to talk about books, it goes a lot smoother. And if you've been reading Entertainment Weekly and if you've been keeping up with what's new in the book world, a lot of those books will be familiar to you. Plus, the new bookshelf is usually really popular, so it's usually kind of a mess. So going over there to zhuzh it up and make it look good, can't really have enough excuses to go do that. And then the last thing I'm going to leave you with are further resources for training. And this can be for yourself. This can be, you know, if you want to have people think about something that they're particularly interested in, you know, you can give them some focused training on that as you do the usual bite-sized pieces. Book list, as I said, webinars, those are good for what's coming up in books. Publishers will come and present some titles that they have coming in the future, and those are for all ages. So if you are the kind of place that does Reader's Advisory for all ages, this is a great resource. Dorcas mentioned in my bio that I host Shelf Care, the podcast, and we talk about specific books, but the format of this podcast is that I start by talking to a librarian somewhere in the wild, and we'll talk about kind of an issue in Reader's Advisory or collection development. In the most recent episode, I talked to Robin Bradford, who is a collection development librarian, and we talked about kind of the boom in trade paperbacks in romance and what that means, and it was a really fun, surprising conversation. We also have a section where our audio editor, Heather Booth, offers some great audiobook suggestions, which are always welcome. And then I'll talk to someone from Booklist, so you can get to know one of the editors, what they're excited about, what they are seeing for the future, and what you should keep your eye out for. The Corner Shelf newsletter is a similar thing. That's a Booklist newsletter that is for Reader's Advisory and collection development. I mentioned novelist training resources. I don't think these are listed in their in the especially for Reader's Advisors section, but they partnered with Library Reads to present these crash courses in a genre. So if you're you're getting a million questions about historical fiction set in Paris during World War II. They have a crash course in historical fiction. I think that's the newest one. But they've done science fiction and they've done romance. And those are free and brief, and they will help get you up to speed on genres. And RA for All is a blog run by Becky Spratford, who's a librarian. And she really, I mean, I don't know that she was the first person to talk about this, but she really popularized this concept of reader's advisory is something that that all staff should be able to do. And so she has a lot of training resources. She has a lot of great insights and book suggestions and things like that. So I recommend checking out RA for All. And oh, I missed a suggestion, which is Book Riot also has a ton of podcasts. And I agree with you that it has a ton of podcasts and that they're great. So other ways to engage staff, I talked about integrating reader's advisory into the things you already do. Some of the most effective things that I did was to, in that sort of twilight period when you're waiting for a staff meeting to start and everyone's getting off the desk and you're waiting for people to, put stuff in their locker before they come upstairs or whatever. Whoever is in the room with you, just start talking to them about books. Ask them what they have checked out from the library. Ask them what they're reading, what they're enjoying, if it reminded them of anything else they've read, if it reminded them, if they picked it up because of a TV show or something like that. I also think, I don't like this, but feeding staff members during a staff meeting makes people talk so much. Brownie mix costs like $1 when it's on sale, so I'm going to go ahead and suggest brownies for your staff meetings. If you're in a position to do performance goals for folks, build reader's advisory into those goals. Say this year I want you to put up 3 displays. I want you to make, 2 bookmarks or use the Bibliocommons catalog and make 2 book lists for people to share. And again, using folks' interests and strengths as the jumping off point. So if you have someone who's really crafty, say, okay, can you make a bookmark about, craft projects that'll make you feel good based on these books? So you're sort of incorporating the tone of the book and also something they're really interested in. But I'm sure I hope you folks have other exciting, creative ways that you have incorporated reader's advisory into your staff work or things you want to try that you haven't been able to try yet. And I'd love for you to share that because we have about probably 6 or 7 minutes left. But that's all I have to talk about. So if you have questions, now's the time to ask, but you can also find me on the Twitter or send me an email. And I'm happy to talk to you about this and about how fun reader's advisory is.
We'll open the floor for questions and comments. Susan, we'll give everyone to in their questions and comments.
Sorry, Dorcas, I can hear that you're talking, but I can't really hear what you're saying. So I don't know if anyone else can hear you.
Let's try this
Oh,
again. Hello?
there you are.
So we'll open the floor for questions and comments and give everyone a chance to type in their messages.
Hey, Dorcas, are you reading anything good while people are typing things up?
Well, I can say that your presentation made me proud to announce that I am an avid Amish romance novel reader.
Yes.
I can say that without judgment, thanks to you, Susan.
No, there's no judgment. I love a Beverly Lewis.
She's my favorite.
Yes.
And also my dream vacation is to Amish country, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Man.
So there you go. You all know something about me.
I love it. Guys, we're all learning from each other's strengths. I learned about shoe fly pie from Amish books. I'd never even heard of it before.
I've
I
not
don't know what it tastes like.
till then, till and I also have another Beverly romance novelist. Her name is Beverly Jenkins,
Yes,
and she's wonderful as well.
I like her for a lot of reasons, but she writes historical and contemporary. So when you can find an author who does a lot of different things, that's Reader's Advisory Gold.
Wonderful. And her contemporary actually are the characters in the contemporary novel are actually descendants from her historical novels. So that's,
Oh, I don't think I knew that.
yes, they are. So we do have a few comments and
Yes,
questions. And Tiffany says that Forbidden by Beverly Jenkins is one of her favorites.
a classic.
And World War II, Lauren, mine too. I love that. Um,
Yes.
I'm reading Victorian Mystery with a trans man protagonist called The House on the Half Moon Street by Alex Reeve, which is enjoyable
Oh,
so far. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And Susan, you have a question. Is there any RA resources for young adults? How is the best way to get teens involved in reading?
that is an amazing question. Um, so I can give you some advice. I will say my focus has always been on adult books and adult reading. And so there are people who are much better about talking about resources for teens and YA who are much better at it than I am. But um, yes, there are. So, I mean, if anyone who is sitting in has any favorite young adult reading suggestions, let's do that. Go ahead and share them. One thing that comes to mind is this is probably showing my prejudice as an adult books reader. The Alex Awards are, and that's another list from ALA. They're books that were published for adults, but that have appeal for teenagers. And so when they are talking about why this book is on the list, they'll say why it appeals to teens. You know, sometimes that means it'll have um, protagonist who's a teenager, or you know, it's in a setting that might be really interesting to teens, or it touches on something that's going on in the world that affects teens' lives, and so that might be interesting to them for some reason. Um, and in terms of how to get teens involved in reading, um, again, you know, there are people who are much smarter about this than I am, but the folks who talk about mirrors and windows, that kind of originated as a concept for younger readers and as building literacy and as building reading engagement. Um, so I think if you look for folks who talk about that, you'll most likely encounter some uh, teen reading resources. And then when you're talking to teen patrons, you know, the same appeal elements apply. You know, um, teenagers are just as interested in whether a book is going to be super fast paced, whether it's going to, you know, be funny or not funny, whether it's going to be something they can relate to as adults are. I don't know if that's very helpful, but I hope it
That's
is at least a
fantastic.
starting point.
Well, Susan, attendees, we are currently out of time. You do have a lot of other questions to come in comments. Unfortunately, we can't share them, but if you do have more questions and comments, please feel free to email um, your state CE representative, or Susan has her contact information there and you can email her directly. So,
Yes.
Susan, again, thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar. And once again, you will all receive a survey on the presentation, and we would really appreciate it if you would complete it and give us your feedback. And thanks, everybody. Again, be sure to join us at 3 p.m. for our final concurrent sessions, Trauma 101 and Being Inclusive when celebrating your library's anniversary. Thank you.